lot of events like this. Why this, why not?
Because I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about my view on the budget impasse in Springfield, the importance of the budget deficit problem being the #1 problem facing the government of the state of Illinois. I'm very pleased that I was able to use this forum to speak to all of those questions.
Do you envision that the income tax rate would need to go above 5%? You said its starting point would be where it was before.
Yeah, my position when we were advancing the spending plan that we sent to the governor in May was a public acknowledgement that the state didn't have the money to pay for that spending plan. That spending plan reflected how the majority in the legislature felt about state spending. Furthermore, I would be prepared to negotiate with the governor to raise the revenue to pay for that particular spending plan. And so throughout, I've maintained a very open attitude that I'm prepared to sit with the governor and talk and negotiate about finding sufficient amount of money to pay for spending by the state that would bring on the support of the majority in the legislature.
Why would you look at the income tax before the sales tax, which is what the governor's advocated for?
My view is that taxation ought to be based upon ability to pay. That's my general view of taxation. It should be based on the ability to pay. Beyond that, I'll sit and talk to people about their ideas.
Would that tax increase be permanent or temporary?
That would be decided by the legislature. The legislature and governors have gone in both directions.
Do you have a position on that?
Not today.
Has there been any discussion that if there is a tax increase, have you told the Republican leaders, I expect Republicans to vote for it too, not just all in your people?
A tax increase bill will not pass in the legislature without Republicans.
Have you expressed this to the governor about the tax increase?
This last question?
No, about a tax increase up to 5%. Is that something you guys have discussed?
We've talked generally about revenue, never specific. Even yesterday, we met, we talked about revenue. We didn't get specific
You didn't talk
about
about numbers at all.
or the amount of money.
Mr. Speaker,
in your view, is there any movement yesterday in your discussions, Governor?
I thought there was movement, small movement. I said that after the meeting, that I thought there was some progress, and that in a matter like this, why the progress is going to happen in small steps. Nobody's going to hit a home run, and then everybody walks off the field. That's not going to happen.
Mr. Speaker, folks at Chicago Public Schools say that in not much over a month, they're going to have to do some pretty draconian stuff, layoffs, bigger class sizes, borrowing they can't afford unless you guys come to help. The Senate's passed a bill that they seem to like. You haven't called it. So how are you going to deal with this next month?
My basic position is what I offered in my remarks earlier, that the Chicago school system is the largest school system in Illinois. It's 86% poor children, 85% minority, 16% English learners. Therefore, it deserves special attention, special consideration from the legislature. In terms of, I think it was Senate Bill 318, which was passed by the Senate and is concerned with the Chicago school system, I disagree with the bill, because the bill would set a sunset date for the block grant and for the formula all at the same time on the same date, and then the bill presumes that everybody in Springfield would go into negotiations about a new method of distribution. As I see it, why there's a Republican complaint about the block grant. So that's apparently something the Republicans want to change. We'll take the Republicans for what they're saying, that it's good for Chicago's school system. In my view, in legislative negotiations, I wouldn't give that up unless I knew it was coming back in exchange as part of negotiations. And the way that bill is drafted, why you'll have a sunset date, and on that date, Chicago will be negotiating with the remainder of the state when the Chicago school population is about 20%. And there's a Republican governor who is publicly not real fond of the Chicago school system. So my disagreement on the bill relates to process in the legislature and negotiations in the legislature.
I understand your position. You have your position, the president has his position, the governor has his. Meanwhile, the school system says they're gonna go over the cliff not too far in the future.
That's what they say, and that's why I stand as I did today. And I said a few things that people in the other parts of the state don't want to hear. So there were people in the audience today from outside of Chicago, there were members of the legislature from outside of Chicago, and they don't necessarily agree with my statements that this particular system deserves special attention, special consideration. That's understandable. I am not going to change these statements. I've lived in Chicago almost all of my life. This is the public school system for Chicago, and I'm going to stand in support of that system.
Why do you say the governor's not fond of CPS?
He's made numerous public statements that, number one, they ought to go into bankruptcy and they ought to abrogate the contracts. I'm sure you could.
He hasn't told you anything.
Governor Rauner has been publicly open about this for years.
Mr.
Fairly
Speaker,
available.
with your deep roots in Chicago, I'm curious about your thoughts with everything that's going on right now, especially after the mayor spoke this morning publicly apologizing for what happened. If you could talk
Sure.
about that.
Yep. I'm like you. I'm still involved in fact finding, so I'm learning from the media, TV, radio, the newspapers as to the facts, what happened, who did what, and I haven't finished the fact finding, so I'm not in a position to be offering specific comments or positions today. I can tell you that this year the legislature passed Senate Bill 1304. It was sponsored by Representative L.G. Sims in the House, and it did a lot of good, solid changes in terms of police discipline, police training. So this is the bill that provided authorization to use body cameras. This is the bill that prohibited the use of chokeholds, as happened in New York. It was a good, well thought out bill. I talked to Representative Sims in the last few days. He's prepared to reconvene his committee, take additional testimony, and move legislation if it's deemed appropriate.
Speaker, it seems like we've had a few positive steps in the past couple of weeks with the compromise that just came out of the Senate that you guys passed, a couple of meetings that we haven't had in months, but it didn't seem like your speech had changed much for those of us who had heard it many times before in Springfield. So, on your end, do you feel like there have been compromises that have been made, any sort of progress? It didn't seem like you were ready to budge on any of those turnaround items, and it doesn't seem like the governor's ready to give them up either.
I have an open mind on all of this. Now, I set out my position. It hasn't changed since January. A lot of people around the legislature have changed their positions over the last several months, not me. What I said in January, I'm saying today. It relates to basic rights of people in this state, the basic right of people in this state to earn a livelihood, to support their family. That's what I'm all about. I think I made a good, valid point earlier that where the legislature was able to come to an agreement with the governor on budget making in those three appropriation bills, there was an absence of a demand for changes in workers' compensation, collective bargaining, prevailing rate. Translated, the governor took his extreme agenda and put it off to the side. Came to a judgment that he wanted those budget making bills on his desk to sign the bills. Now, if he were to fall into that pattern and continue along those lines, why we'd make even bigger progress.
Speaker, is there any way for everyone to learn a lesson here and have this not happen again, more impasses in the next few years of Governor Rauner's leadership?
Yeah, don't be taking these things to the extreme. All right? I've done these many, many times. I've worked on budgets for many, many years. And what I know from my prior budget making is that if people operate in moderation, you can solve these differences. And you can get a good functioning budget from the state of Illinois. One person who can speak to this with expertise is former Governor Jim Edgar. And he's done it publicly, where he's advised Governor Rauner, get a budget. It's the budget that enables you to manage the state. The governor is elected as the manager. We in the legislature are part of the legislative branch. We're we're not called upon to manage the agencies. He is. And having been elected as the governor, he took on the responsibility to manage a very large operation. He's handicapped in that responsibility of management when he doesn't have a full budget. And so there's solid reasons everywhere. People that have done this before would say, don't do these things in the extreme. Do them in moderation. Because there's always another day. You don't get something you want today, there's tomorrow, there's next year. You go back on these things.
Do you think he's learned his lesson in that regard?
Well, I'm not gonna.
Do you think Illinois does need to be more competitive?
And let's be clear, what I said, that I pledged to work with him professionally, and that's what I'm gonna continue to do. If you followed me over the last 11 months, you don't see any negative personal comments out of me about Governor Roundup. I'm not into that, and I'm not going there. So that's how I plan to proceed.
But some
Do you
say
think
that
that-
the crisis is so bad in Illinois that it's gonna take extreme measures.
Do you think that Illinois needs to be more competitive in the business realm? Is that really what this is coming down to? Do you think Illinois is doing okay, or do we need some sort of competitive reform?
I think Illinois could do better, which is the reason why I'm supporting the governor's request to privatize the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. He's persuaded that that's something that we should do. That agency is our economic development agency. It's the agency that gives grants to business and certifies businesses as eligible for tax breaks when they invest in Illinois and bring jobs to Illinois or keep jobs in Illinois. So there's work to be done, there's things that we can do, but as we do that, we ought not to be lowering wages in the standard of living of middle-class families. Government should not be in that business.
I've spoken to a lot of CPS parents, I've talked to a lot of social service agencies who have not gotten money from the state of Illinois. And the one common theme that they all say is they all feel as though this budget crisis is all just about a battle between two egos. Two people who really, they feel, don't really care about the middle class, but it's just about two men who won't give in.
Well, it's nice of you to quote unnamed people. I stand on my statements. I stand on my statements.
Speaker, the past few days, Senator Brady said he's not sure if a budget will ever get done for this fiscal year for 15 if, as some people believe, this impasse goes through primary season in the spring. At what point do you start looking ahead to 16 and planning on that? Is there anything that requires a 15 budget?
Yeah.
Well, so tell me about that doomsday scenario.
Those people and those groups and those entities that I referred to earlier that have been supported by the state for 25 or 30 years. It accounts for about $6 billion of spending. And we ought not to let them become victims of this. We ought not to do that.
So if it goes into primary season in March or April, do you roll that over? Do you roll 15 into 16 and start just doubling up next year? What would happen as you get down to that end of the planning period?
It's a lot of speculation, and for me to be offering comments on the speculation doesn't help the situation. We ought to be about the business of resolving these issues and getting the job done. That's what we should be doing.
Speaker, going back to what's going on here in Chicago with the police department and everything, why do you still have confidence in Anita Alvarez to do her job when a lot of people don't?
Yeah, and my answer is the same as earlier. I'm engaged in fact-finding, and I'm getting my information from TV, radio, newspapers. I haven't finished the fact-finding, and when I do, I'll come to a judgment.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Speaker.
You're welcome.
Thanks, sir.